Okay. All right, so should we start and then just see how it goes?
Start.
Okay.
Pour my tea.
Hi,
Hi, Adam.
how are you?
Pouring my booze into my pouring my tea.
It's starting off on
That old chestnut.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, enjoy your tea.
You can't read a good book without a nice cup of tea.
I know.
I just happen to have this one.
Oh, any good?
Yeah, I left it. Now, Adam, I want to ask you a question. First
Uh-oh,
of all,
yeah,
great cover, right? The
yeah,
simplicity,
it is.
really eye-catching. Um, did you now I dog ear my books. Do you look at that?
Yeah.
I know purists, I know we shouldn't do it, probably ruins the value of the book. But
Well, what is the value of a book?
I tend to dog ear things, I want to recall. Did you have a favorite chapter?
Um, well, typically, my favorite chapter will be around my favorite films and any anecdotes, but I think I know so much about. Actually, I really love the chapters around like Catch 22. I know it
Oh,
was
me too.
considered a flop at the time or a failure by
Yeah,
whatever standards. Of course,
yeah.
then, latter years, of course, people come back to it and look at it through a different prism of time. And, time can be generous, but just the cast, those are all my.
I think my favorite anecdote in the film has to do with Robert De Niro and the film the film that never happened.
Oh,
Bogart
yeah,
left here.
right.
I thought that was pretty revelatory because, I'd always heard that De Niro got fired, but he had never commented on it, and I thought it was very poignant. It was kind of it was sad. I felt sorry for him.
Who's but now that you bring up like who like would have seen any work of Robert De Niro's and thought he'd be good in a Neil Simon comic?
I
It's just
know.
not.
Putting
He's
putting
a hot actor at the time, but he doesn't belong in Neil Simon.
well, plus the idea that it was based on Dustin Hoffman's life, and didn't he have anything to say? Like, why didn't Dustin Hoffman play the part? Since it was kind of, that's what you get from the book and from The Graduate, that it was based on his life. And then when Richard Dreyfuss took over,
When it
obviously,
was adapted, reworked into Goodbye Girl, the Goodbye Girl.
yeah, completely different film. And but maybe somebody should redo Bogart Slept Here with an older Robert De Niro. I would see that. I love that part. Of course, I loved all the out of town stories with Neil Simon. I love Neil. I'm just
Yeah.
a Neil Simon fanatic. I thought,
You ever do a Neil Simon play?
do I have a favorite?
No. Did you ever do anything on stage of his?
Only in
Scenes?
acting school. Only
Right.
scenes
Right.
in acting school. Um, Boy, his stuff is terrific. The Odd Couple classic, Barefoot in the Park.
Gotta bring up Odd Couple so I can do my Walter Matthau.
The
That came as that. I enjoyed reading about that too, Walter Matthau. I didn't know what a son of a so and so,
yeah, that was
because we love him so much.
rough. But there's a lot of Buck Henry in the early part of the film. That was, a book that was very interesting.
That The Graduate was a real partnership. It was a real partnership.
Yeah, as was Catch 22, and then it
Catch 22
kind of fell apart. And it's, I guess the movie that I would be most interested in seeing in its uncut form would be Heartburn, because I love Heartburn, even though it feels kind of mangled. Man, I'd love to see the original. I'd love to see Mandy Patinkin. I'd love to
Right.
see anything, you
Andy
know.
Patinkin was the original, um, was originally cast in the male lead, and then
Yeah,
it wasn't working. That was also like how he navigated firing as many huge stars as he had to do. You
yeah,
know, that is got to be quite a thing, to a task
yes.
to
And the
that has to
stories
let go of Robert De Niro or Mandy Patinkin or any number of other people that he had to fire because they just weren't working.
we had called each other throughout
Gene
the
Hackman,
reading. We were both the George C. Scott sections tour.
yeah,
Wow.
right, and just how many. I just want to say he also fired Gene Hackman, just for the record. But
Yeah, and then rehired him years later.
he rehired him, yeah, yeah, for the
Wow.
Birdcage. Yeah, yeah, he worked with a number of people who struggled with addictions. That
Mhm.
George C. Scott being notorious, very but they come across so also so broken. You have nothing but sympathy for these guys. Like George C. Scott is obviously very haunted, or
I know. Yeah. Well, I'm
you know,
sort of curious what that was.
there must
My
be a.
grandfather worked with him a couple times. They did the Crucible. Um,
Oh my gosh,
yeah, they did the
the play,
Crucible, and then years later they did Changeling,
the
it's a
movie,
horror movie.
right? I saw
And
it.
the only reason he took it is because of um, wanting to work with George C. Scott. But there was a very interesting anecdote in the movie when they're doing Day of the Dolphin, and that's what ended the relationship with Buck Henry. Not literally, but they're
Right.
working
Yeah.
on-screen relationship. But now I want to go see. I want to see that again. But that was it. That was a great chapter.
Speaking of which, we could add that the Alamo Draft House chain,
Oh,
as you mentioned earlier, has filed for Chapter 11, which is very tragic.
yeah, it's really sad. I was we were talking about this before. They sponsored a large chunk of my book tour.
Yeah.
I'm going to Alamos throughout the country, and we would show Ghost World, and then do a Q&A, and then sell the book. And it was a fantastic way to be able to sell the book. And again, the idea of the theater that was so great was they had all these first run movies, but then they had a couple
Set
screens.
aside rooms. Right.
Yeah,
They would
for
set aside
revivals.
rooms, right, during the week, especially when,
Yeah,
maybe they didn't
and
have to show.
and each Alamo was independently owned. So I recall going to each different one, and they could decorate the lobby. So one lobby may have had Barbarella and all of that. Another one would have
So
had
they were franchised.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So they had it was very whatever the people were working there, they kind of created their own movie theater. So it was a great idea. And the one in Texas, of course, was the one I probably had been to the most, having been there at South by Southwest.
Right. Well, I think he opened Tim League, who was the founder. I think he opened the first Alamo, might have been even in Houston. I could be wrong, but then moved also then opened them in Austin, and that's of
Yes,
course where I would see a lot of my South by Southwest
I
films.
was
I miss,
I was at the one in Houston and in Austin, the one in Denver, which was a very big one. We showed Grace in My Heart there. I was there a few times. And then I believe there was one in San Francisco. Yeah,
Oh yeah, and they came to Brooklyn towards like about
exactly.
5 years ago.
Exactly.
Um,
That's
I enjoyed many great visits there.
plus, I remember my favorite memory was at the one in Denver, I was with Allison Anders, and it was one of those things like where we gotten off the plane and hadn't eaten dinner, and then this idea that we could have dinner, and I think
Mm-hmm.
we had like cake and ice cream and all of that. Hi, Mark.
Right on
How are
time.
you?
Right on
Nice
time.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
You didn't have time to
Um,
clean up your desk?
You're seeing it in the full horror. Um, do you want me to put headphones in? Is that better for echo, or does it matter to you
I'm
guys?
not hearing any echo. I mean, it sounds pretty good.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
We
a
were-
mic, but it's just for show because I don't know how to
Yeah.
how to hook it up yet.
We're working on it. We're
Work-
all a work in progress here.
I have one, but I dropped it on the floor, and now it's just ornamental.
Well, we're working on a I'm not saying working on. We were doing an intro of sorts before you got on. So we were
Yes.
talking about our thoughts about the book. We were talking about our interactions with Mike Nichols.
Yeah, that was fun.
So we both really, got it. Love the book.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
I love
Thank
it.
you.
I said mine's I do dog ear. Like I do dog ear the book. I'm one of the
I'm fine with that. Rough it up. It doesn't bother me.
well, I like going to the, my favorite, and then I love all his notes and Spam-A-Lot, of course. Later in his life, he would do those, show the graduate. That's what I was talking about at the top he did one with Buck Henry and you get all these thoughtful, I mean, I'd spend the whole time in the audience writing down everything he said, because it was so helpful and wise in terms of comedy.
Yeah, and very quotable too.
Oh, just I was saying when the first time I met him, he said something that was very Mike Nichols. He asked me, he said, "Have you ever read de Tocqueville?" It sounded like something that was off the album or something.
Great.
But
yeah, we're trying to kind of get to what might be the lesson in there. What might be the kernel that he's trying to teach, that he's trying to enlighten you about. Because he had something
comedy stuff. I think so much of it is for him was keep it real. Like a lot of what he says boils down to it's the first thing that starts the book where he says that it's a director's job to make you to think like, what is this really like and what happens next? And I think those were his sort of comedy rules too, like what is it really like, give audiences something they can recognize, and what happens next, keep it moving, go, like, know when you're done with one beat.
right.
And,
that's always the thing whenever I was doing a movie, every time we do I would always say, well, you know what Mike Nichols said, as soon as you get a good take, do it faster. That way, I always remember that was like a Mike Nichols. You cannot go wrong with doing it faster.
That's interesting.
And he would.
What he learned in improv with Elaine, clearly he took so much. I mean, that period of time, not a strategy. Just that's how he just fell into this relationship with Elaine May. Had that incredible period of time as as this duo, and clearly there could have been no better for Mike Nichols, no better schooling for how to make movies and do theater, direct theater, than that period of time for him.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. And it was something that I didn't realize when I started working on the book. I kind of thought his whole comedy improv career with Elaine May was an interesting sort of appetizer to a completely different main course career. And it really wasn't until I got into research that I started to understand how much he invented himself as a director, and also how much of his understanding of what actors do was built into those first years with Elaine.
Let me just ask, to take one baby step back, and then I'd like to hop right back into Mike's career. But from your experience, did you decide to do this book as a result of the chapter on The Graduate in The Pictures of a Revolution, which is an earlier book of yours? Was it your relationship with Tony, your husband, and of course that relationship, or what was the instigating or catalyst for this book?
Well, no, I did the order of things was I first met Mike through Tony, probably in 2000 or 2001, which is right at the beginning of when Mike and Tony started working together on the HBO Angels in America. And you know, Angels was long and it took a long time to get done, and then it took a long time to edit and to air. So
Sure.
that was like 3 years probably of getting to know Mike. And then soon after that, I interviewed him for my first book, which was largely about the making of The Graduate. But no, then I thought I was done writing about Mike and his movies, and I kind of settled into knowing him. I didn't get the idea to do the book until after he passed away, which was in December of 2014. And even then, it was my publisher's idea, not mine. I did not have in mind ever to do a biography, because that's not really the kind of book that I've written before. So I was kind of as surprised as anyone that this idea came up. But once it did, I realized I really wanted to do it.
I was, you know, I suppose the most complimentary thing I could say is I hated the book to end, you know, because it represents my whole life of movie going. You know, I remember seeing The Graduate the first time it played on TV, and it was all cut up. And then
I'd like to add that
they-
I'm so sorry. Just want to add for people watching, we happen to all be, I believe, the same, essentially close in age. So we have the same point of references. Mark and I, especially. I mean, we're a little older, and we're born just weeks apart, I believe. But go ahead, Illeana. I apologize.
we have the same mother.
I just want to say, go ahead.
But it you know, and then through you know, watching trying to find you know, Catch 22 on television, through his career, through watching Spam a lot, through Birdcage, like his whole trajectory of his life, the ups and downs. And so it represented for me a kind of a nostalgia of what a large chunk of films that he represents, and a type of filmmaker, you know, intelligent, smart, witty, you know, that just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it was so strange for me to work on the book, because it, you know, the stuff that I was researching spans this time from way before I was born. You know, Mike was born in 1931, and to things that like I had read about, but had never, that were still before I was born, like, you know, New York nightclub culture in the late 1950s, to, you know, I remember the first Mike Nichols movie I saw, which was The Day of the Dolphin, when I was a kid, which was the first remotely suitable for kids movie that Mike ever made, and probably one of the few. And then you get into years when I was an editor at a magazine, and like assigning stories on the movies that Mike made, and then to the years when I knew Mike. It was just a phenomenally strange, like, even when I was working on the book, I thought, what's going to happen when I get to the Angels in America chapter? Am I supposed to mention myself or not? And then I thought, nah, you know, I'll mention myself at the end. People don't need to see it in the middle of the book.
Yeah.
Well, did you have a favorite part of writing? Was there a particular part of the book that you felt the most free, or unburdened, or whatever you want to say?
I don't think I have ever felt free or unburdened in my life about writing.
Okay.
Like, not on a single day. But I think, honestly, the writing about Mike and Elaine May was a really exhilarating thing for me. You know, Mike and Elaine May, and the early years of Mike's directing. I mean, it was a really interesting challenge to write about Mike directing Broadway shows that I couldn't see, where I had to try to kind of reconstruct what was special about them. That was challenging, but also just the years that Mike and Elaine worked together were the years in which Mike became Mike, like the years when he figured out what acting was, the years when he figured out what directing was, all of the great ways in which Mike worked with women over the decades, which is something that really set him apart from a lot of his kind of generational contemporaries. I think all of that was set up in those Elaine years. So and also they were the years where he got famous, and it's always fun and interesting to write about someone going from not famous to famous. And so I think probably those were the scariest and most fun chapters to write, because I knew the more I worked on them, the more I knew that I was setting up the whole rest of his story in ways that I never anticipated Mike and Elaine would connect to.
When did you hit upon the idea that, because it's almost the spine of the book, losing his hair becomes part of his whole facade, and that's always an aside when you think about Mike Nichols, but in your book it's front and center, and it's what created him in the beginning.
One of the first people I interviewed was Mike's brother, Robert, his younger brother, who's a doctor, and a very erudite, lovely, thoughtful man. And obviously he was essential to giving me a picture of Mike's childhood, because who else would? And I was wondering, even early in the process of the book, how much of a big deal the hair thing was going to be. And so I asked Mike's brother about it, and he said just really flatly, it was the defining event of his childhood. Just kind of factually. And I thought, well, okay, I can't not look at that. I mean, when somebody who's that close to you says it was the defining event of someone's childhood, that also kind of means that your adulthood was shaped by it. And so, I didn't want to come up with a kind of one theory, Mike lost his hair when he was a little boy and therefore he is this person. But it came up over and over and over again in different contexts. I mean, talking about it with people he was directing was a way that Mike had of kind of strategically opening himself up to actors and getting them to open up. But it was also when it was used against him, something that ended at least one really important professional relationship. So it felt like it really mattered. And I didn't want to dodge anything that mattered. The other thing that I kept getting stuck on was George Siegel saying to me that Mike once said to him, "It takes me 3 hours to become Mike Nichols every day."
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an overwhelming thing when you mean it literally. If you feel that you literally have to compose this person, Mike Nichols, which is, by the way, a name he chose for himself, in order to go out and face the world, that's just huge. And his hair, of course, was a big part of that.
There's a running theme. The last person Illeana and I talked to was an author of a book about Cary Grant, who also came up with a kind of a persona of who Cary Grant, Archie Leach, there was and he referred to himself as almost in a split personality kind of way, or as Cary Grant as a separate almost entity.
I thought you were about to tell me that Cary Grant was bald from the age of 4, and you were about to completely blow my mind.
We should say that Mike, the baldness came as a result of, Illeana, dare we say, being vaccinated? Maybe I shouldn't say it, or because it'll scare people. But
well, one thing I'll say is we think that's what it was. Okay. I mean, we think that's what it was because that's what Mike's father, who was a doctor, told him. It could have been alopecia. It could have been something we don't know. Right. But yes, they think it was a reaction to a whooping cough vaccination. That's what Mike was always told. And vaccines obviously in 1935 were not necessarily what they are now.
Yes. The other thing that surprised me in the book was his capacity to be mean and cruel and cutting, Did that surprise you, or had you seen some of that? Or it's always hard, your idols, you want them to be perfect. And
Um, I had not seen any of it. Um, uh, Tony had a little bit, not ever directed at him, but he saw it once during the audition process for Angels in America in a story that I put in the book. But I certainly knew about it because Mike himself had talked about it very extensively and very forthcomingly. When we were talking about The Graduate, he tells a story about how, it was a very long shoot. It was a very hard shoot. Mike had a sort of singular vision of what he wanted, and he was alternately supportive of Dustin Hoffman and rough on him. And very late in the shoot, he tells a story about how he and the crew were crossing Sunset Boulevard to try to steal a little street footage. And he heard the cinematographer Robert Surtees say to his crew, "It's all right, it'll be over soon." And he said in that moment, he realized how rough he had been. And he told the story about a couple of different cinematographers, but there was one story where he said to the cinematographer, "I'll apologize to all of them," and the cinematographer said, "Oh, no, it's too late for that." And as Mike told his own life story, a really important part of his narrative was his journey away from being that nasty guy to not doing that. I mean, years later, he said, one thing I realized was that if you're the director, you have absolute power, and it's not fair for you to abuse people who can't answer back to you. But it was something he struggled with. He would get impatient, he would get frustrated, and even into the 80s, he could be really rough on people. He was really rough on the cinematographer for Angels in America, Stephen Goldblatt, who almost quit and then kind of pushed back a little bit, and from then on they had a fine relationship. So he did learn as he got older to keep it under control.
yeah, some people
Diane might have had sorry, Illeana.
Oh no, I was just going to say, coming from, Elaine May and Mike Nichols, just even being in their presence, one is reluctant to even speak, because they're so smart and so witty and so stylish. I could see how that could be a very intimidating experience working with Mike Nichols.
Well, the flip side of it is he was so practiced and skilled and masterful at putting you at ease. I mean, especially I think after he married Diane, and it sort of was one of those things where 1 + 1 equals more than 2. They were suddenly this power couple, and he was extraordinarily gracious about knowing how to put people at ease and knowing how to relax them. And you hear story after story from actor about how he was able to draw this specific thing out of them and get them to open up. I mean, especially late in his career, when he directed Death of a Salesman on Broadway when he was over 80.
With Philip Seymour Hoffman version, yeah.
Right, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Andrew Garfield was in it, and
right.
And they all talked about how what was most important to Mike was making that family, that group of actors who were going to play the Lohman family, feel like a family, so that they felt like they were in it together. And I think he really did that.
He went out of his way to try to create a synergy and that kind of family environment. He worked with a lot of very, very powerful actors early on, especially as well, where he one method he had early on was having them lay down head to head and run through the entire script together.
Yeah,
that was really that's amazing.
On stage, that was a big thing that he did. He did it on this play, The Prisoner of Second Avenue, a Neil Simon play with Peter Falk and Lee Grant, and he did it on this apparently extraordinary production of Uncle Vanya, which starred everyone from Julie Christie to George C. Scott to Lillian Gish. I mean, one thing that blows my mind about Mike Nichols is he was so famous and so successful for so long that the span of actresses he works with, it literally goes from Lillian Gish to Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman.
I mean,
That's
that's you have a century of acting talent in there.
Yeah, he fired like actors at the level that most people would die to cast, you know, like
I
but
love the story where Gene Hackman fired Gene Hackman on The Graduate, and years later when they're doing the Birdcage, Gene Hackman is still afraid that he's going to fire him. I thought that was incredible.
I think casting was so important to Mike. He felt it was so important that when he fired someone, I think he felt that he had failed. Like, you know,
right.
But if he couldn't see you, if he couldn't feel you in the part, whether it was Gene Hackman in The Graduate or Robert De Niro on this movie Bogart's that eventually Mike abandoned, or Mandy Patinkin on Heartburn, I think it was mortifying in a way for him to fire someone because it was his own mistake. And yet, I think he could also hear Elaine May, who was considerably less emotional and sentimental about this, saying in his ear something that she said, which was, if an actor isn't good by the 5th day, fire them. They never get better.
Yes. I know in the case, because I was friends with John Hurd, and he was devastated. I mean, even later in his life.
Streamers, right?
He said to me, I was the guy that Mike Nichols fired before we went to Broadway.
Yeah, that was a huge, painful decision, especially because I think, by all accounts, you know, John Hurd was great in Streamers, but one thing that was really complicated about that play was, I think Mike got really frustrated by the pacing. I mean, he really wanted it to move a certain way. And John Hurd, who was quite young then, was in a phase of his career when, according to the other actors, you know, if he couldn't feel it, he wouldn't say it, including on stage in the middle of a performance. So there were a lot of like pauses while John Hurd got to the place where he was okay to say the line. And I think that probably made Mike crazy.
Nichols' eyes were rolling the back of his head. Yeah.
Faster. You know, Michael O'Keefe, who was an understudy on that production, was very, very young, said that he remembers Mike Nichols standing in the back of the Long Wharf Theater in New Haven. I won't curse, but he was just saying, say it.
You can't, and you can curse on this show, so don't worry. But on the flip side of that part, you know, cutting actors or firing them for casting purposes, for artistic purposes. On the flip side of that, he also stuck out some very difficult situations with actors who were struggling with internal demons, like George C. Scott, like Art Carney, like who am I leaving out?
Richard Burton.
Right.
So, you know, he stuck with those people, and you know, they would disappear sometimes for days at a time, like because they were so struggling so much.
Yeah, I think Mike had a lot of sympathy for substance abuse, even when you get to Working Girl and Melanie Griffith, whose problems with, you know, cocaine and alcohol on that movie are quite public, so that's not like telling tales out of school or anything. And he was really frustrated with her, and he was annoyed with her, but as much as he was saying to her, you're not going to ruin my movie, he was also saying, like, don't you understand this is your chance? Like, do you know what this part can do for you? Do you know how great you can be in this part? But I think he really thought that people with substance abuse problems who were actors, that it was really connected to their fear and to the sensitivity that they needed to have to go on stage every night. So I mean, Mike could be tough. He would say, you know, you're not going to ruin this production, but he was also he was sympathetic about that. He was never nasty about it.
I love this section. I mean, because so much has been written, of course, about The Graduate, and I love his.
A lot by Mark himself.
Well, of course, and I like the concentration on Catch-22, which is kind of a mess, but it's so amazing. That was a movie early on, like in high school, I discovered it, and again, it took years to see the actual film. I was seeing chopped up versions on television, but every actor in the universe is in the film. And the stories with Orson Welles, I thought, were particularly poignant.
That's a movie that I don't think I'd seen until I started working on the book. I'd somehow always missed it, and
yeah,
I knew that I wanted to write a lot about it and to learn as much about it as I could, because it's his first failure, and it feels like and failure. I mean, I'll say I think there are really interesting, cool things about Catch-22, and I think Mike did too. But financially and critically, it was a failure, and
it's on the Criterion Collection now, so you know it's had a bit of a.
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely, and it's completely worth seeing. But I read everything I could about the making of that movie and talked to everyone I could. And one thing was reading about it. It was shot in 1968 and 69. It really takes you back to this era when journalists were allowed to go on the set of a movie for a long time, not just like a perfect publicist controlled 90-minute visit, but days and days where you got to see people fight with each other and go crazy and lose their minds, and got to see shots go wrong. And so some really good journalists went to cover Catch-22, including Nora Ephron for the New York Times Magazine, with whom Mike later worked and became friends. And so the stories, there was just a great amount of stuff to draw on about the movie, and it probably ultimately worked to the movie's disadvantage, because by the time it finally came out, so much had been written about it that like every single review talked about it in the context of this kind of 2.5-year folly, Mike's comeuppance. It was really, it in a way like died of its own publicity, which happens now sometimes.
Right. Well, that and MASH came out a couple months before, which was a huge success, and kind of it was sort of that same syndrome as Dr. Strangelove and
Failsafe, yeah.
Failsafe, yeah.
But I love the fact that when Mike goes to see MASH and he realizes instantly that his movie is doomed, his reaction isn't just like, oh
jealousy.
No, my movie's doomed,
right? Or jealousy.
Oh, I wish I'd made that movie. Like, this is the movie I wanted to make, and why didn't I make it? He was always very he didn't get defensive about work that sort of outcompeted him or about his own failures. He was sort of interested in how it happened. And one of the big things, I mean, two big things that came out of the failure of Catch-22 was, one, he sort of was exhilarated to realize he would survive, that he could have a big public failure and it wouldn't literally kill him and it wouldn't end his career. And the other thing was, he came up with this pattern, this idea for how to react to failure, which was, when you have a big thing that's a disaster, go and do something small that means something to you, that you have no commercial expectations for. And in this case, that was Carnal Knowledge, which obviously turned out to be a big success. But over and over and over again, you see him react to a failure by making that decision. I mean, he does Streamers after he's had 3 movie flops in a row and has kind of been temporarily exiled, or at least self-exiled.
Director's jail.
Yeah.
Again, the name of the book here is called Mike Nichols, A Life by Mark Harris. Just want to remind people it's available wherever books are sold.
Mark, I wanted to ask you a little bit about his relationship with Neil Simon, and and they, eventually sort of had a kind of a falling out, and I saw both the Broadway version of Biloxi Blues and the film version, and they're so, I mean, they're night and day from each other. And did he have, I know I'm asking a couple questions here, but did he make a conscious decision? The casting of Christopher Walken in the film Biloxi Blues just makes it so wildly different from the Broadway version. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about his relationship with Neil Simon.
Yeah, I think it was complicated. I mean, it starts very well because Mike's big breakthrough directing Barefoot in the Park on Broadway is also Neil Simon's big breakthrough. That was a huge hit. It ran for 4 years on Broadway, and they go right from that to The Odd Couple. And Mike wins back-to-back Tonys as best director for those two pieces. And then he goes on to direct Plaza Suite and The Prisoner of Second Avenue. And it gets complicated because I think that, they both had big egos, and Mike actually took a big share of the profits. I mean, he got more of a percentage than most Broadway play directors of the time did because of everything he was bringing to those plays. And I think Neil Simon eventually started to resent the kind of critical consensus that Mike was saving those plays as much as he was directing them. And then they had sorry, go ahead.
So sorry, I should shut up more. But I was going to just say that there's also this convention that the theater is, right. I mean, I'm not a stage actor, but the theater is a writer's medium, the playwright's medium, whereas film is the director's. I mean, so maybe there's also this is my terrain, Mike.
I think so, but at the same time, I mean, Elizabeth Ashley said this amazing thing to me. She was the star of Barefoot in the Park, and she said, I don't think Neil Simon ever fully forgave Mike for everything he did for him, which is kind of a beautiful summary of the tension between gratitude and resentment in that relationship. And then things were really pretty rough between them by the time that, Mike never wanted to direct the movie version of a play that he had directed on stage. And so things were pretty rough between them by the time he makes this movie Bogart Slept Here, which is the movie that he fires De Niro from, and then the whole movie falls apart and shuts down completely. That was a Neil Simon script, and he and Mike were not seeing eye to eye when they were directing that, but they reconciled. And then Mike, Illeana, as you mentioned, he directs the movie version of Biloxi Blues, which is a play that he did not direct on Broadway. And by that one piece of casting, by replacing Bill Sadler with Christopher Walken, who is the drill sergeant of this young, very green platoon, he changes the entire mood and dynamic of the movie, because every other performance has to change in response to Christopher Walken's weird, scary, low-key version of a drill sergeant, as opposed to Bill Sadler's really like yelling, top volume, sort of more classical drill sergeant that was the case on stage.
And how did Matthew Broderick feel about that?
I think he, at least in his account to me, he was quite happy about it, because it made him feel like he was not going to just be re-delivering the performance that he had given on stage, and given on stage probably a couple of hundred times. For him it made the movie something new. That movie Biloxi Blues was the first movie that Nichols directed after a pretty serious breakdown that he had, which was caused by halcyon addiction in the mid 80s. And I'm always really touched like in talking to all of the actors on that movie, who were generally very, very young, because it's a movie about, you know, a young platoon of new GIs. Everyone sort of said that Mike was not only kind of fatherly to the entire troupe of actors, but became the director that each of them needed to be in turn, that he was insistent with one and cajoling with another and tough with a third and friendly with a fourth. Like that was a really impressive side of him, that he could look at any individual actor and know what that person needed in order to give their best performance.
And then his third, that sort of is the beginning of his kind of the third act too. I mean, we're skipping over Silkwood, which is one of my favorite movies. That's like
I love it
his
too.
it's such a stripped down film, and almost harkens back a little bit to Virginia Woolf, not in the subject matter, but because it's so stripped down. You know, it's just the relationship of these, you know, these three individuals.
Well, I think it was the movie that got him back in love with making movies after 8 years of not doing it. It was the first time he worked with Meryl Streep, the first time he worked with Nora Ephron, and it kind of changed his, it's the movie on which he changed his whole approach to his career in a way, because it was like Mike abandoning the I'm going to be a visionary stylist part of his career, and saying, you know, what's really important to me is working with people I believe in on something that I think is great, whether that's an actor or a screenwriter or the subject matter. That's when Mike stopped caring about like any question of like, well, how is this going to fit with the previous things I've done? And it allowed him to jump from genre to genre and from style to style and from theater to movies and back again, as long as he really believed in the project, really believed in the people, and cared about what he was doing. That was enough for him. And Silkwood, I think, is where that started.
Yeah, incredible film, and I love all the anecdotes from Silkwood too. It's terrific. From, you know, I like Meryl Streep showing up with her dyed hair and
right, cutting her hair off, and then.
Well, also this was a world like, you know, when you think of Mike movies, I think of like the Upper East Side or something, or a really nice restaurant.
Yes.
I don't think of Texas, you know.
Oh.
So him going down there and learning about, you know, plutonium processing plants and things like that. You know, it's one of many times that he extended himself in a new direction, because there's nothing sort of brittle or caustic or urbane about Silkwood. It's just really human people interacting with each other, living in this kind of ramshackle house, and eventually going toward this awakening that is also a tragedy. Like, if you know that it's a Mike Nichols movie, you can definitely understand it in the context of his career, especially in the moments he finds and the way he works with actors and what he gets out of them. But I think if you didn't know that Silkwood was made by Mike Nichols, I don't know that anybody would ever guess, you know?
No, I remember when it came out, you know, it's like the stylish version of a Martin Ritt movie, you know, it's just.
Yeah, that's a perfect, like Martin Ritt. That's exactly right. That's exactly who.
Norma Ray, was that one is, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it was of that period.
That
Yeah.
gritty, you know, but
Yeah.
still, but beautiful, and with beautiful motifs of their house, you know. Meryl Streep, even with the dark hair and the look, she still looks beautiful. She's still engaging. It's not an ugly film. People aren't.
Oh no.
You know, so it's got some style, but it's bare bones. No, I for me, it's actually one of my, obviously aside from The Graduate, it's one of my favorite films of his.
For me too. And I was interested to read the reviews, because, you know, it got a bunch of Oscar nominations, but it didn't get a Best Picture nomination. And when you read the reviews, they're pretty admiring. But there's this little undertone of like, I mean, this is good. I don't know what it is, and I don't know why Mike Nichols is directing it, but it's good. But there's definite bewilderment as to like, well, what's this all about? Who is he now? You know?
Right. I think because it comes in the time of Meryl Streep's career where every movie she was a chameleon and doing something completely different. And so that was her brunette film, as opposed to concentrating on Mike Nichols as as much.
Right. I mean, she's coming off right off of the French Lieutenant's Woman and then Sophie's Choice. So absolutely, it was taken as like the next installment of the Meryl Streep story.
Yeah, she wanted to do something light after all that other work. You've mentioned a number of people who you talked with. So obviously, you talked to many. What was the general sense in reflection from the majority of people you spoke to about Mike? And was there anybody you couldn't, just for fun, was there anybody you couldn't get that you tried? Or
Well,
two-part question.
Okay, so for first part, I don't know that there was a general sense because I talked to about 250 people, and some people knew him for decades. Some people had worked with him for a couple of weeks on one movie, or had worked on one play. So I just wanted everybody to give their own part of the picture rather than have them try to say what he was really like, and some of them were a lot of them were like, I'm so happy to get a chance to tell you about what he meant to me and how great he was, and some of them were like, I really want to explain to you that he was awful to me, and here are the details of it. I think at the very beginning when I was working on it, maybe the first set of people I interviewed were a little reluctant to say anything negative because he had died so recently that it almost felt like it to them it felt impolite, but it took me so long to do the book that wore off eventually. And to the second part of your question, yes, there were absolutely people I couldn't get. I mean, I guess if I were to pick a big name who I wish I could have talked to about Mike, probably the one that stands out is Jack Nicholson. They worked together a number of times, and I would love to have asked him about Carnal Knowledge and about Wolf and about The Fortune, and there's a lot to ask him about. But
and replacing Mandy Patinkin,
right? But he has not done interviews about his work in a very long time now, and there's a lot I can do and a lot I have done to convert a no into a yes, but you also have to know when you're just not going to get someone, and so my feeling is always when that happens, because it happened on my first book too, you have to work a little harder to honor those people and to make sure that you're not penalizing them or their experience just by virtue of the fact that they weren't available to talk to you or weren't interested in talking to you, because that happens, and happily a lot of the people that happens to in this case are famous, and so gave interviews along the way and have talked, because I was also dealing with largely a very elderly pool of people, like the number of people I interviewed between the ages of 80 and literally 105. I mean, that was literally the upper limit, and it was much more of a challenge to make sure that I got to those people and to mostly their memories were fantastic and they were incredibly generous, but to draw them out, to let them tell their story their way, to listen to what they were saying and try to ask follow-up questions that would mean something to them, that was a much bigger thing for me than not being able to get someone ultimately doesn't define your book.
I wanted to ask you a process question. because inherently the problem with a biography is always it's fun to write the upswing and then you get to the plateau and then you go down. And how do you find yourself midway through the book reminding yourself, okay, this is where we're going to have failure after failure, and then we got a great big comeback at the very end of his life? Is that something as a writer you faced or were thinking about at all?
I was less worried about writing about failures, which I think are actually really interesting to write about and really illuminating, than I was worried about just sort of hitting a dead patch, something where there's no failure, there's not a success, there's nothing much going on, that was a big fear I had from the time I went into the book, which is that you are at the mercy of the events of someone's life, and lives aren't neatly shaped, orderly narratives that are designed for book writers to exploit. So I just felt like my job was to understand why things happened in the order in which they happened. And I thought if I could do that, maybe I wouldn't hit a boring part, maybe I wouldn't hit just a long dead patch. And I don't feel that I did. I mean, my sort of plan B, my backup solution in case I did, would have been, I think, to accelerate through certain years more quickly than others. And obviously, the making of Regarding Henry is not going to be as interesting as the making of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but the making of Catch-22 might be, because even though that's not a movie people really know well, there's a ton to say about it. So
sure.
So I was
if Orson Welles had been in Regarding Henry, it would have been a longer chapter.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I mean, the thing I was more scared about, honestly, was how much would I be able to write about theater? Because with movies, success or failure, at least I'm writing about something that if you're curious about it, you can go check it out. But Mike's theater career was really important, and really important in understanding him as a person and a director. And so I thought, God, I hope I don't end up writing a book where people just skip the pages with the stage productions to get to the next movie. So like the big challenge for me was writing about things like The Odd Couple and Spamalot compellingly enough so that even if you didn't see them or couldn't see them, you'd still feel like you were being held by the storytelling and the people involved, because happily, there were usually interesting people involved in those shows.
I thought it was, like when you mentioned Regarding Henry, it was, it was a reminder of, oh yeah, that movie, and then Working Girl, and then, he meets Harrison Ford, and it is like his life is like a cocktail party where people that he has met resurface, or he comes up with another project for them.
And it's interesting how many people to the very end of his career wanted to work with him a second time. I mean, Natalie Portman worked with him twice, both when he was, very, very well on in years. Julia Roberts worked with him twice on his second to last movie and his last movie. So
yeah, and the Tom Hanks comes up in Primary Color. That was a fun part in the book. So Tom Hanks comes up as maybe being in Primary Colors. He's not in Primary Colors. And then but he's going to be in Charlie Wilson's War. So the people do stay in his head. And you write in the book, he had an amazing casting sense.
Oh yeah, and then even after Charlie Wilson's War, which was not necessarily the easiest experience between him and Tom Hanks. Mike is like, let's do Our Town together on Broadway. You play the stage manager, I'll direct it. So right. he loved working with people more than once. I mean, to his dying week, he was planning a movie that Meryl Streep would star in, you know, and that was 32 or 33 years after the first time they worked together. I mean, if he thought you were talented, if he thought you were great, he wanted to work with you forever.
Yeah. I was just going to mention Spam-A-Lot, which I loved.
I love that
I
too.
saw it 3 times on
Oh, wow.
Broadway. Did you have a Mark? Did you have a favorite? You know, obviously I didn't see his early. I saw all of his later Broadway plays, and I actually did see Waiting for Godot. So I love that part of the book. I
Wow.
got to see, because I worked for this publicist named Peggy Siegel. So we would always get tickets for things.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know you worked for Peggy Siegel. That's amazing.
Yes, and we
met
represented
Mark,
Good
yeah.
Morning Vietnam, and I got a ticket to see that show, which was very weird.
Good going.
It's like, did you see that? That was one of those Broadway oddities.
No, you know, it was preserved on film at the Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center. So when I was researching the book, I got to see that, but I was not one of the sort of lottery winners who got to see that. I did get to see a lot of his stage work, but not that.
That one hurt.
Yes, I saw that. Spam-A-Lot I saw about 3 times, which I loved. Spam-A-Lot. I thought
You
that
said
was
you were also, we both talked about, we both got to see
Hurly
Burley on at the off-Broadway version.
at the Promenade.
Right.
And I actually
Promenade,
saw The Country Wife with Frances McDormand and Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, when Hurly Burly was at the Promenade, I was working behind the counter at a greeting card store that was on the other side of Broadway.
Wow.
And
Did Harvey Keitel try to pick you up too? Because apparently,
no, I think I was not to his taste. But I do remember really wanting to see it and sort of saving my money that summer to see it. And I remember Judith Ivey coming into the store to buy like party favors and stuff for Sigourney Weaver's baby shower. So I felt very
she mentioned that to you.
adjacent, you know.
She mentioned that to you.
She did. She said, "Oh, because I recognized her, and I said, oh, I'm excited to see your play." And she's like, "Oh, I'm buying, you know, party hats for Sigourney's baby shower." I felt very, you know, right next door to something really cool.
I remember that play. Believe me, that was our 1984. It was at the neighborhood playhouse. Wow, that was like back when things were. Now, you know, one funny thing I have to mention, just because it's one of these oddities, I'm going to go to my grave. But I was in the audience of watching a preview of The Country Girl, and I was sitting next to the actor Judd Hirsch, and I was watching the play, and all of a sudden, I didn't know Judd Hirsch at all. And very loudly, while a scene was going on, Judd Hirsch went, "Oh, Mike, Mike, Mike."
Wow.
And I always like, what did he mean by that? So, what do you think he meant by that? What was he saying?
That's what it's.
How interesting. Well, I think that was kind of the general reaction to The Country Girl. You know, there's a lot of you know, hand on forehead and moaning about it. But I'd love to know what specifically he was reacting to.
I don't know, because I thought, is it some crutch? I didn't think it was so much a reaction to the play, but Nichols leaning potentially on some, you know, crutch that he go to or something like that. Anyway, I had to get that off my chest because it's one of those bizarre things where you go, what did Judd Hirsch mean when he said?
Now I wish that had been my 251st interview. I mean, there were like 100 more people I could have talked to. I really, you know, I stopped because I had to start writing. But
did you ever think, what would Mike Nichols think of the book?
Oh,
great question.
Daily, hourly. I mean, I had to really work during the research, honestly, but also during the writing to get him out of my head or away from, you know, over my shoulder, looking at what I was writing and saying, well, that's almost right, but not quite, you know.
Funny.
It would just paralyze me if I let that, you know, I hope that
Right.
I hope that he would like it, because I know that he liked. It's as honest a book as I knew how to write, and I hope he would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm sort of sorry that he. My fantasy is that he could annotate it. You know, he
Oh,
Yeah, right.
that you could
Yeah.
get the Mike version of my book where he sets
Right,
the
writes in the
right up.
margins.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, the director's cut.
I feel he would approve. I was saying at the
I think
top,
so,
like
too.
just the cover alone is so Mike Nichols, you know, the lettering, the graphics, the photograph, everything is.
Yeah, it's a Richard Avedon photograph. He was one
course
of
it
Mike's
is. They were good
closest
friends.
friends, and I can say this because I had nothing to do with the design of it. I think the book is a beautiful object. I love the way it looks. So
It is
so I
beautiful.
know Mike would have liked that.
Yes.
Showing
And I
your
brought
Avedon
this
book.
out in honor of Avedon. I have
Oh, nice! Wow,
a beautiful book.
amazing.
And
Beautiful.
I just happened to, since we're doing show and tell for a moment, I was, I was, I just happened to pick up this the other day, and I coincidentally, the shampoo
Yeah,
and I noticed that I was looking at the extras, and I noticed that you do a conversation about shampoo. People should check it out with Frank Rich. I thought that was, and it was great. It was great to see you at work, so I kind of can anticipate having not met you before today.
that's
But
right.
that's
Yeah,
gonna be
well, that
nice.
was really fun to do. It's always like cool to do
He
something.
had
for
a
the
sparkle
series.
in his eye talking to you the whole time, Frank Rich. You know, he really seemed to
Well,
really enjoy it.
he's a delight. He's so smart and so
Yeah.
interesting. I wish I need to have something to show you here. You want to see my here's my masks.
Ooh, that's neat.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I bet you've never seen those before.
You want to do before we call it a day here? Do you want to just do a news breaking? Maybe you can tell us what you're thinking of doing next.
Oh, I wish I had something to tell you, but I'm genuinely not sure. I mean, I've been working on ideas for 2 different book proposals, and I'm hoping that 2 of them, both of them will come together, or one of them will come together, or maybe neither of them will, but one of them will lead me to something good. I can't wait to get started on something else. I don't think it will be a biography, but I'm not sure.
Well, I hope you get to do some in store over the next few months as things open up. I hope you get to do some live things with the book, Mike Nichols.
Yeah, I wish I could too, although it's been really fun doing a virtual tour. You know, I'm getting to sort of quote unquote go to places that I would never actually be sent. So I can't complain about it. And you know, it's thank God for Zoom. It's really helped me get the word out to people about the book, and thank God for people like you who are interested in it.
So great. Like I said, it's just for anyone who loves theater, and particularly that era, you know, from the late 50s. You were saying, well, I wasn't alive in the late 50s either. I just want to be alive. For those people who wanted to be watching Elaine May and, you know, Mike Nichols. I mean, just that whole era.
Or in my case, Art Carney and Walter Matthau on stage.
Oh
now
God.
It's garbage.
Poor Art Carney. He ended up in Connecticut.
I know. I wish I could have seen that, but you know, you have to guess what that was like.
That's true. Yeah.
It's published by
Penguin
Press, of course. Penguin Press. It's called Mike Nichols of Life. Thank you for all the time you've given us. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you so much.
Of course. We'll find another reason to do this again soon.
All right, great. Thanks again for doing this. It's really so nice of you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure meeting you.
Thank you for
respect. We will meet in real life.
Likewise, maybe in a theater aisle or something when we get to do that again.
Now
I left LA. I moved to Connecticut. I can't wait to see this. That's another thing too. Boy, does it whet your appetite for wanting to see a Broadway play.
Now you can tell them your other Mike Nichols. Well, we both have Mike Nichols. We both met Mike Nichols at various times. I mean, you know, no. Okay.
It was during the country.
Sorry to put you on this. Sorry to put you on this.
It was during the country wife.
No, that's rough, a rough period.
It was a rough bit, yeah. You know, it's like he was not happy. And you have a photograph in the book too. And I said, oh my God, that's exactly what he was wearing. It was
I have a
bomber jacket.
mine was on a happier note because he had just done this Q&A with Stanley Donen, and I was sitting right up front center because I wasn't going to miss out on that. They showed Charade, or probably not Charade, but it's one of Stanley's films, and then he's of course living with Elaine May, right? She was there, and I snuck a photo. I was telling Illeana that they were talking afterwards together, standing there, and I'm just like, what's on my phone here? Boop. I got my Elaine May, Mike Nichols photo, and then afterwards he came out alone. I was standing in outside the Walter Reed, and he walked out by himself, and I got like my 5 minutes with Mike Nichols and a photo.
It's pretty special to have a little encounter with him. I mean,
totally feel very lucky to have had that.
Yeah.
Being such a huge fan.
Anyway, all right, I got to go back to work. It was too much fun.
Thank you so much. This was a delight, and hope to meet you guys both in person soon.
We will
Okay.
Definitely. We'll make it happen. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye, Adam.
Bye.
Okay, I'll talk
Talk
to you later.
later.
Okay, dear. Bye.